can have some sour. Actually, who's hungry? Are you guys hungry right now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let's change the order of things and let's just make some food.
All right.
Okay. Let's make some food. And I'll get you a little dish for the sauerkraut. You can have there you go. And we'll make the kombucha a little bit later.
Getting ready to start an aquaponics system?
No, I'll explain that a little later. That's a giant black soldier fly breeding device. Oh. Shouldn't be in my living room.
Awesome.
Black soldier fly. You know, like.
Where are you breeding the cobras?
Yeah, I actually have some snakes. I'll show you them later, but they're not cobras. Don't worry. Oh, I do have some interesting pets, though. Like, here's sort of my opinion on pets. The pets of the 20th century were things that like we thought were aesthetically pleasing or psychologically pleasing, but we ended up having to feed food into them and like take care of their waste. Okay. The pets of the 21st century will be things that may or may not be psychologically appealing, but they are things that actually, instead of producing waste, they actually produce food for us. In the case of kombucha, and instead of having to be provided with food, they're going to be things that like take up waste and turn them into food. So it's sort of an interesting thing that's going to happen. But I have a little collection of organisms that I use for teaching biology, and since we're going to start cooking right now, what I'll do is I'll explain to you what this is. What does this look like here?
Oatmeal.
Okay, this is oatmeal, and inside there are thousands of these little beetles. You can see some of them crawling on that white paper. They're called grain beetles. Okay, and there's certain organisms like soy, oats, wheat, rice that were pretty rare and not nearly as common before humans walked the planet. And then around 10,000 years ago, we figured out this thing called agriculture. And we're like, oh, we can grow these foods that are pretty much non-perishable. Like once you yield it, it doesn't have enough water content to rot very easily. So we started like siloing, storing all of this grain. And so there are certain organisms that had meager existences, but now are like mighty in number because we've provided food for them in huge amounts. And one of them is the Sawtooth grain beetle.
It's so funny, they sprint and then they stop and then they sprint.
Yeah. What's also cool is they play dead. I'll show you. So let me get one of them, and I'll show you how they do their little thing. What's cool about the Sawtooth grain beetle is they don't fly. They're capable of flying, but they won't. They're stubborn like that.
The Roadrunner.
Yeah, and like if you mess with them, see, he's I think he's a little confused right now. Oh, there's a couple of them. There's one, two, there. If I zap them, they play dead for about 6 seconds. Isn't that crazy? Oh, I dropped him.
Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is great.
Oh, well, here's
Don't
one.
forget to spill some oatmeal.
So,
Oh my god.
isn't that amazing? They always play dead for like a second.
They're dumb but smart. Kind of. Smarter than moths.
Moths are pretty.
They gotta be the dumbest thing with multiple cells.
And what I do with these things is, this little piece of paper has the population count, and every semester my students and I count the population in here. These organisms are pretty ingenious because they live just in grain. They don't require water. They don't and even their waste is solid, and so what ends up happening is they don't end up contaminating their food by pooping on their food. Their poop is literally a crystal, so they can just eat the food that's right next to the crystal. It's a guanine crystal. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
So then by eating the grains, they provide us those crystals that we can use in something?
As best I can tell, it is a nitrogenous waste, so you could use it as a compost. But the reason I bring this up is actually because grains are really good for these things. They evolved eating them. Grains are not so good for us because we didn't. There's something that we sort of discovered 10,000 years ago as a really cool way to make sure that we don't starve.
Hey, look, cheap free food.
Yeah. And what we ended up doing was we ended up putting it in every meal of every day.
That's what's causing inflammatory disease.
Yeah, inflammatory disease. Like, for instance, the fat profile of grains is very skewed towards omega-6 fats instead of omega-3s. And so that's inflammatory. But what is more, grains don't want to be eaten by people. They have all these things in them called lectins, phytates, that are irritating. So
all grains.
All grains. I would say wheat by far and away is the worst possible grain, because the wheat that we're eating today has been selectively hybridized and bred to have more gluten, which makes it rise wonderfully as a bread, but it's like literally eating some kind of an epoxy or a paste, and it really messes with your gut as it goes through there. And
What is Ezekiel?
Ezekiel, like the idea with Ezekiel is you're having sprouted grains, and the problem I have with sprouted grain bread is the bread has been baked, so much of what's good in the sprout has been destroyed by the heat of the baking. I would say if you were going to eat, like if you just could not get off of bread, I would say probably the best bread would be something like a bread that was non-grain, like one that had been made with either potato flour or almond flour, because those are non-grains at all. And then if you insisted on a grain, which is like wheat, rice, and corn.
Or a local thing we could do mesquite.
Mesquite actually would be pretty irritating because of the phytates in it. You know why, like we soak beans before we make them because they're so full of phytates. Mesquite, it's a wonderful, like all of the grains in my opinion are a wonderful food for staving off starvation. But the less of them you have, the better for your body's health.
Emergency food only.
Yeah, that's sort of my opinion. And I hate to say that because the entire cornerstone of civilization is based upon grains now in terms of the agriculture. But even grain agriculture is really, really unsustainable.
Yeah.
Most of the grain is for the animals, the meat we eat.
Yeah.
Some meat.
Yeah. And so here's sort of what I'm going to teach you right now is the Paleolithic diet. And obviously the Paleolithic diet, it doesn't have grains in it. The other thing it doesn't have in it, which is another hard thing for us to swallow, is dairy. We started drinking milk out of other animals within the last 10,000 years. And some people tolerate it better than others, but it turns out that milk from cows is dangerous in a couple of respects. Number one, cow casein is really, really allergenic. Like the reason you get real phlegmy after you drink milk is because your immune system doesn't like it. Second, cow growth hormone is bioidentical to human growth hormone. So as an adult, you'd want to be careful about having too much growth hormone because it could promote things that shouldn't be growing, like cancers. So it's like there's several problems with the cow milk. Goat milk is much better for you in terms of it's a lot less allergenic. It's a lot more digestible. And so what I do is I ferment a kefir that is made of goat milk. Pass that around and smell it. It smells like a cross between yogurt and bread and beer. And that's because
How do you spell kefir?
Kefir.
Oh, okay. Oh, right, okay, I've seen that.
It's in the grocery store.
Yeah, yes.
So the difference between yogurt and kefir is that yogurt is only bacteria produced, and only certain bacteria in a very sterile environment that's at a certain temperature. Kefir grows anywhere between 60 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's a symbiotic colony of both bacteria and yeast. So in the same way that kombucha is a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast that ferments sugary tea, this ferments milk, which is also sugary. And I'll show you something really cool.
So it makes a good source to ferment because the bacteria in the, what is it, a fungus that it's working with?
It's a certain kind of yeast, and it's a candida, but not the kind that infects you. It's a good kind of candida.
So it uses up the lactose and makes it into something that we want?
It uses up the lactose, and that bowl of stuff that you smelled is just so full of probiotic bacteria that it's very, 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 very helpful for your gut. This is a kefir colony. And I got these from a man in Australia in 2008. He sent them in dried form to me. And what's cool about kefir colonies is that they are functionally immortal. Like, you can kill them. I always tell people they're like the elves in the Lord of the Rings. They won't die of old age, but if you stick a sword through them, they'll die. These things will basically, like, they will continue to live as long as they eat.
Wow.
And the reason they're immortal is because it's not really an organism. This is a superorganism. You're looking at something that has the number of bacteria and yeast in it that the city of El Paso has, probably many more, has people, okay? So this is like a city, and the city will grow, and eventually the city will split. So over time, these lobes will get so big that they will split apart, and one colony becomes two colonies, two become four, four become eight. And they have a fractal structure, so they're lobes within lobes within lobes, and each lobe is growing. Isn't it cool? It's really cool stuff. And this, like, it never ceases to amaze me, you know, because we always think of all living things dying. Well, if you think of people as a continuum, a population doesn't die. I mean, it could, but it's the individuals within the population that have a finite lifespan. And same with this. Certain members of this superorganism have the ability to secrete this gel, this matrix. They're like the engineers of a city, and they're creating the substrate within which everybody else is living. And this thing is like a mothership floating through space, but it's floating through milk. And the milk itself is the food. So it's like, it's literally just this mothership floating through a nutrient medium, getting bigger and bigger all the time. And as long as the little members that have the ability to create the matrix that makes this thing an actual physical being are alive, it will just continue like that.
Is that enough to start that tablespoon? Is that enough to start a colony?
Oh yeah. I could break off a part that would be like the size of a hookworm egg, and it would be enough to start it.
Wow.
Like, there's bacteria are so small. They're just so small. And it just, the smidgen of smidgens is enough to start another one of these immortal colonies. And that what will happen is they grow exponentially. They will grow 10% per day. And so you'll start off with almost nothing, and it will feel like it's not doing very much. And then 3 months later, you're like, oh, you're trying to give it away because there's just too much of it. And there's different ways that you can control how they grow. The more you stir them, the faster they grow, because you break up the little cheesy shell that they form around them, and you expose them to more and more lactose
So by increasing surface area.
Yeah, you're putting on their surface what their nutrient need is. Second, if you break them up into little tiny bits, they will grow very quick because it's the surface of them that grows. So the larger the surface to volume ratio, the faster they can ferment things. So if you had a big one the size of a baseball, it would be fermenting things relatively slow, because it would only have the surface area of a baseball, even though it had the volume of a baseball. Incidentally, the largest one I've ever seen is about the size of a golf ball. And you have to be really careful. Like, the way you change them is you have to, like, scoop them out and just very gently place them, just because simply by jostling them at all, the lobes get so big that they just shear off one another. It'd be like if your left and right leg were each 3,000 pounds. The first step you took, you leave the other one behind you and just rip right off your body. So what's happening with these is they're, you know, like once they get big enough, the lobes just shear.